I've always felt my brain works somewhat differently than others, and sometimes struggled to explain and express some of my ideas as a result. As I've grown, I've come to understand, and as ridiculous as this might sound, perhaps I was just being too creative in some cases. I was burdened and drowning by the excruciating numbers of plots, details, and projects I could think up on any given day. Sure, not every 2 a.m. jot down in my notes app was Citizen Kane material, but I like to think some weren't half bad either. The problem is, by the time I tried to share these ideas, I would be so fixated on one shot or describing one moment that I would get lost in the sauce. I would practically be speaking a different language when trying to explain it to others. Now, I'm only 21, and according to a website I found, I've only seen about 2.07% of the physical world, but there have already been some significant points in my life, often in digital spaces, that have helped me refine my creative energy. Some moments that have helped me gather my thoughts. So, that is literally what I built, a collection of my thoughts. How perfectly cheesy. Welcome to Project Fugue. Step inside when you're ready to begin. Now, as much as I love a great open world game, I think it's best if I hold your hand a little bit as we go through this gallery. After all, it is my brain, and this does feel a bit like I'm sharing a 3D diary, so I would prefer if you didn't get lost in my subconscious. And while we're at it, take note of the controls on the wall before stepping through the first doorway. And one more thing. Each room will roughly be comprised of a few small memory fragments and one very large fragment. If you could interact with the smaller pieces first, and then save the biggest pieces for last, that'd be perfect. Great, you made it to the first piece. This is a fragment from the 2019 puzzle game Superliminal, and begins my introduction to the idea of the computer as a medium. I played this game in 2020, right as I was reading Janet Murray's book, Hamlet on the Holodeck. In the book, she argues that the computer affords three characteristic, but not unique, pleasures: immersion, agency, and transformation. Now, there's a very slim chance I do justice to an entire academic text, right here, right now, but I will say this book changed the way I play all games and take in all interactive experiences going forward. For me, Superliminal fused perfectly with Murray's work, as the entire game relies on a shift of perspective and interacting with things in typically the least intuitive ways. I suppose I should use game loosely here, as this room is dedicated to seeing interactive narratives as their own genre. Superliminal's ending message, without spoiling too much, was extremely moving for me, and like all other pieces in this room, are experiences that will stick with me forever. Firewatch is a lovely game with a beautiful art style, and for me, it didn't have as impactful interactions, but it did tell a lovely story. A story that includes thoughts about isolation and self-doubt, and ultimately following your passions, even if that carries you outside of your comfort zone. This is not an award show by any means, but if anything, at the very least, Firewatch deserves an honorable mention, in the grand scheme of things, as this game is probably my earliest dealings with the genre, way back in 2016. This fragment here, that looks like nothing more than a simple graph, is the result of a single level from Detroit Become Human, one of many throughout the entire piece. This game makes every dialogue choice carry an irreversible effect on the story. Sometimes you need to quickly choose an answer to a question in a matter of seconds with only 4 choices. Those choices can be responsible for removing a main character, or even preventing certain endings from even being a remote possibility for your specific playthrough of the story. The sense of responsibility behind each choice, even in a digital environment, had a very moving effect on my storytelling skills going forward. Okay, you've made it to the last piece in the room, and these bigger pieces are typically going to have a longer story associated with them, so sit tight and get comfy with me for a little bit, okay? A few years ago, I was bored one winter night, and I didn't have any plans that weekend, and didn't feel like going out in the cold anyways, so to no surprise, I hopped on my computer and looked for something to do. Now this was mid-semester, so most of my friends were either working or drowning in midterms. I somehow was on top of my projects for once and had some time to play some games. However, with no friends on, Call of Duty or Counter-Strike didn't sound that appealing. So I opened Steam and started browsing for some single-player games. It was not long before I arrived on a title called The Beginner's Guide, which was from the creator of the Stanley Parable, an iconic title that dominated the narrative space when it came out, so my hopes were high. And 90 minutes later, I can promise you I was not disappointed. The game left me lying awake in the dark, listening to the track you've been hearing, for much longer than I expected. One of the concepts from the game that stood out to me was this puzzle in front of you. It was a recurring theme. See, the whole meaning of the puzzle was meant to represent this idea that sometimes you cannot move forward without completely letting your past go. And I love that. Solving the puzzle would require you to open the door with the visible lever and step into a dark passage where you would see another door with no switch. You'd then have to quickly reverse the lever again and step into the passage, momentarily locking yourself in the dark void. This would reveal a lever on the back side of the first door. The lever would open the door and allow you to move forward, but you would never again be able to go back to where you came from. Now, I really would have loved to bring that puzzle here for you, but it just so happens that I'm more of a filmmaker than a game dev, so if you could just walk through the door, and we can pretend you solved the puzzle, that's fine, right? It will be our little secret. Okay, forgive me for not having smaller stories for this room, but hey, you clicked on the giant spoon, and now you get to hear the one story in this gallery that's associated with a physical place. And the things around the room are relevant, so feel free to take those in. And the reason this story made it in here is because it was a night where, ironically enough, the whole struggle I explained before you came inside the gallery didn't happen. I thought of some crazy film scene off of the most uneventful night out with friends, but they humored me the time to tell the story, and that's pretty much it, but it's all I really wanted. So let me set the scene. Nights like these happen somewhat frequently for me in college, but something about this time just stayed with me. My friends Nick and Anthony hit me up asking if I wanted to tag along to another midnight movie of The Room showing at the Esquire Theater in Denver, an offer I hardly ever resisted. These kinds of screenings revolved around the cult following the film had, a cult following that thought it was funny to throw plastic spoons at the screen every time the horrible picture frames in the main character's house were shown that had stock imagery of spoons in them. We hopped in the car and headed down, first parking on Broadway by the Walgreens. It was probably about 10:30 as we headed down to this coffee shop called Mutiny, passing the beautiful Mayan Theater on the way. There, we caught up with the rest of the gang, we shared some laughs, I pretended to know what I was doing as I browsed the record collection, and spectated a few games of chess until 11:30 rolled around, and we rolled out to the Esquire. Upon arrival, we got super lucky with parking, but not with the tickets, as they were sold out already. Half of our group had purchased tickets online ahead of time. The remaining three, Nick, Holden, and myself, were out of luck. We explored our other options, which was not much at midnight, so we headed home. On the way back, we passed the glowing lights of what felt like a mirage on an otherwise quiet highway. Great Scott's Eatery. This was a must. We hopped off the exit, headed inside, and grabbed a booth. For me, it was Nutella French toast and a cup of that classic diner hot chocolate. We finished our meals and took a moment to breathe. This dumb little idea popped into my head. For some reason, I felt like sharing. I just said to them, "Damn, I've got this goofy little movie playing in my head about tonight." To my surprise, the two of them played along and gave me the mic. Nick said, "Go on." So on I went. I don't know, it's just something about sitting in this diner late at night in the snow. It makes me feel like we're at the end of some heist movie where we failed and our point man is bleeding out under his heavy coat. I look towards our driver, and the lights of police cars start to surround us through the foggy windows of the diner. But we pay no attention. We've got these amazing breakfast foods in front of us, and they're not going to finish themselves. And then I see this shot, just in slow motion, pulling away from us, outside through the windows, to the deputies rushing in. The shot continuing to a practically overhead shot of the whole diner, before fading to black. That's it. That's the end of the film. That's the end of the night. See, as expected at first I got a little snicker, but ultimately, that does sound pretty fucking cool, was a pretty good summary of the response I got. And that's pretty much it. The night wasn't all around L, but somehow this chill moment with the guys, and me explaining this thought in my head, concisely and without criticism, made the night for me. It left me fearless of feeding into my creative brain from then on. Again, not everything I dream up is Citizen K material, but why leave it to die inside my brain? Those midnight screenings were a crazy thing to experience, but maybe that was the creative juice I was hoping for that night, and didn't get, so I guess I improvised. This room is also comprised of a bunch of video games, but unlike the first room, I'd like to focus less on the narrative elements, but instead on the sense of place these digital environments create. Take this photo, for example, from Skyrim. This particular shot reminds me much of my study of the sublime in CMDP media aesthetics. One might argue that the confines of a created world with boundaries might not accurately relate to the term that defines greatness beyond all possibility of calculation or measurement, but I beg to differ. I think the fictional northernmost province of Tamriel, Skyrim, defined by its vast world broken into 9 sectors, each topographically unique from one another, with each sector home to residents with different socio-economic backgrounds, to be a perfect example of the sublime. The idea that a team of developers was in essence able to create a miniature reality where residents of the province react to your presence and share their thoughts and fears of the world around them is a very powerful thing. And that's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the amount of literature, language, racial tensions, political stance, and more baked into this game. This jersey doesn't have as epic of a story behind it as I wished. Sadly, I didn't win an ESL or DreamHack Major as I wore it, yet I did want to leave it in this gallery here as a symbol of the large interest I have in digital communities and how esports, NFTs, subreddits, and many other corners of the internet are shaping up to look like the sort of global village Marshall McLuhan described in The Medium is the Massage. I'm so happy I was able to import at least one large-scale map from the game. Here we have the city of Los Santos from Grand Theft Auto, a city my friends and many others have come to memorize just like our hometowns. With streets we know how to navigate and landmarks we can easily use to describe where we're at. Every alleyway and rooftop is usually accessible and just stands for the years of memories we've had on the island since the release of the game in 2013. It's no surprise that after hundreds of hours spent roaming these places, that there are numerous memories associated with every nook and cranny of the city. This is an axe from Assassin's Creed 3, the 5th major installment in a series that occupied me for many winters during their typical October or November releases. These games are of course not fully historically accurate, but they incorporated many events that I was sometimes learning about at the exact same time in history class. This series fueled my passion for history and in many ways I feel kept me interested in otherwise boring classes. The ability to run around ancient Greece, Renaissance Italy, or revolutionary America while reading a textbook on the same periods did wonders for me. Reading stories of games like Red Dead Redemption 2, now being used as tools to teach American romanticism, brings me so much joy. I think there's a lot that can be gained by seeing these titles as more than just mindless entertainment. I see Minecraft as a very approachable example of this idea as the sublime as it relates to video games, especially in a title that randomly generates infinite landscapes and can do so on an engine that runs on nearly any device from a mobile phone to a smart fridge. A game comprised of not much more than cubes being one of the largest commercial successes to date speaks wonders to the amount of joy and creativity that sparks from this title. This is by far the most sentimental piece in the room for me. Here, you're looking at the map Dust 2 from the Counter-Strike franchise, a game I've spent thousands of hours on rather than hundreds. This map is the most popular across all Counter-Strike titles, from 1999 till today. It's a map that has graffiti on the wall near the A site that reads Goose, as a nod to the co-creator of the game Min Lee's online name Gooseman. A map where the doors at the bottom of mid lane, mid doors, is synonymous with Spencer Hiko Martin's inhumane reaction moment from the ESL 1 Cologne 2014 Major. I could go on and list dozens more of these historical moments, all associated with this one map. I don't hold a PhD in digital media or anything like that, but I definitely am a firm believer that there is seriously something that can be studied and learned from researching the amount of online culture and digital identity that revolves around the group of people that have again just played on this single map, Dust 2, and know the memories each lane of the map holds throughout its over 20 years of existence. So I do hope you enjoyed your brief time in this little memory palace I tried to craft over the last few months. A crazy aspect of this place and what it stands for is that it's relatively infinite. Whether we're talking about pixels or brain space, this place could go on forever. This is both the beauty of it and obviously the curse. It is sweet to be in touch with your creative memory palace, but since you're the art curator of an infinite gallery, it can sometimes be daunting. Yet, I'm happy I did it, even if it wasn't supposed to happen. See, this is a place that, even if no one resonates with, I can return to be reminded of the numerous influences 21-year-old me had in 2021, as we fought through a global pandemic. This project was the last thing I had expected to be making at the end of my degree. I wanted to make a documentary about collegiate esports, but going into a lockdown and moving 2,000 miles away from my college to take care of family wiped that off the table pretty quickly. I do appreciate this place, and it only makes me cherish the short piece you're about to watch so much more. The piece was nothing more than an imitation of Vertov's Man with a Movie Camera, a documentary I did not fully come to appreciate even after making my imitation. It was once I placed the piece in this gallery and viewed it in the dark theater that I tried to craft with my amateur Unreal Engine skills that I finally appreciated watching the community of people travel and live out their unique lives around me as I commuted to class. It's something I miss and cannot wait to return to. So, thanks for joining me on a trip through what has been on my mind lately. If you have a particular theory that I mentioned here that you want to expand on, or if you just want to get in touch, I guess you can email me at robertyoushock@gmail.com. last thing, and this time it's truly goodbye, so thanks again for coming. The room you're about to step into is something I see as less of a complete memory or specific reference like the gallery rooms you've traveled between, but this area stands more as a symbol, an icon for an uncapped passion, in this case, music. I have no significant accomplishments in an audio project, only numerous memories at Red Rocks, various venues in Denver, and so on. The way I chose to try and represent that is a low-gravity, high-energy room playing a mixtape I'll probably throw on SoundCloud one day. It's about 20 minutes long, so stay as long or as little as you like and just vibe, just reflect, and think about your own memory palace in the meantime. Sound good? Until next time.
Consider again that dot. That's home. That's us. That's here.
Crossroads and scarred maps, I know these books are hard box. A hard box. Man will get burnt like a pan to a hop. I'm a boss, but I've yet to pay the cost. Some will call me crazy and others will say I'm lost. See me in the party with the powder and the fuss. Came to get paid, so I never take a loss. The kid from Hume who was schooled in a mosque. He's hitting them with fire or I'm hitting them with frost. Only speak truth, lines never get crossed. That's why I always shine like I'm gloss. Don't do the devil and I don't do God. Plus I ain't the type to do any old job. Do my own thing, don't go stir up. Do it with the team or I do it on my Todd. When I'm up front, reel 'em in like a rod. See the crowd come together like peas in a pod. Taking over shit like the mob. Man will get burnt like a pan to a hop. will get burnt like a pan to a hop. Holy moly.